Imagine that your daughters come back and listen to this in another 40, 50 years and they just want to hear something from mum. What do you wish they heard?
I hope I convey this particularly to my daughter and my son, to be kind to yourself. Don't be so harsh on ourselves. I think in most cases we're all trying to do the best we can and we don't always have control over those outcomes. So just really be self-compassionate as much as we can.
Welcome to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we help mentor you into becoming a more successful version of yourself. We do this through giving you access to mentors you typically would never have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their experiences, their life-changing events, their fields of expertise, and most importantly, their purpose. My name is Harry Goldberg, husband to an incredible woman, father of 2 amazing daughters, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast. And now, just before we learn from yet another exceptional guest, if you find value from these conversations, please make sure to like and subscribe below, leave a review. It really does make a difference. And of course, share with someone else who's going to find value. Now, listen in, pay attention, take some notes, enjoy. Let's begin. Suzy Green, welcome.
Thanks very much, Harry. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. For our listeners, Suzy Green's an internationally renowned expert on positive psychology. She dropped out of school at 16. She studied psychology at university, began working in a psychiatric clinic, went on to try and find a cure and prevention for depression worldwide, taught the first university course of positive psychology, and that was at University of Sydney. Lectured for 10 years, has also consulted hundreds of individuals, companies, and schools on well-being and resilience. You've also authored a highly practical personal development book called The Positivity Prescription.
Yeah, you've done your homework. I love it.
And you've also got a family of your own, and you're very dedicated to them. We've rescheduled a couple sessions around that as well. I love that.
Absolutely, yeah.
As we dive into this conversation, how do you define success?
For me, I gave that was a great question, actually, and I think it is in many ways personal, although possibly informed by my understanding of the science too. For me, it is living what I would call an authentic life. There has been some research on authenticity, both in clinical psych and I guess the negative impact of living an inauthentic life. Historically, psychology is always focused on the negatives, but there's also been research on the benefits of living an authentic life. So for me, that is and has been quite a journey on clarifying what matters most to me, my core life values. And I did that back in my 30s when I first started training, moving from clinical psych into coaching and coaching psychology, particularly through the approach taught at Sydney Uni, which was the world's first coaching psychology unit. And I was very privileged to work under the mentorship of the late Professor Anthony Grant. But Tony always spoke about clients needing to know what their values were and then align our goals to our values. So in my 30s, I spent quite a bit of time whittling down. Like if you can Google, there's many, many core values lists available. We have one on our website if people would like to access that freely. But it took me quite a while to sort of whittle down. When I first did it, I think I ticked like nearly every single core value. And then I kept putting it aside and coming back, and I got down to 5. And so it was in my 30s. And then when I moved into my 50s, I revisited that. And they're a little more sophisticated, may I say now, Harry. They're still similar, but yeah, I guess the language around them and the expression of them has matured a little. But they have been, as one of my very first coaching clients said to me, the best decision-making tools that I've ever had. And so for me, that success is, as best as I can, stay true to what matters most and live a life that's congruent with that. Now, that's quite tricky at times, I have to say, Harry, because as we'll hear today, my work is very much my calling, and I realised that relatively early on in my career. But I also really value family. I was brought up with, I fairly recently lost both my elderly parents. I was very privileged to have them to 96 years of age. They both lived till.
Wow.
But I was brought up in a really good family home. Again, feel very privileged and honoured to have had that. So I really value family. So when you've got a calling and then you've got family commitments, it is a bit of a challenge. So I don't want people to think it's easy. It's not an easy journey to live your values, because I think there can be values conflicts that occur, which can make it very challenging for people.
What were those? You said in your 30s you managed to get them down to 5. What were
Yes.
those 5?
Yes. Now I'm trying to remember because I had little acronyms for them. And so I think I'm trying to think, it was SHALF, like spirituality, health, authenticity, love, and financial success, I think. And then when I got into my 50s, I changed it into WHEAL, which was WHEAL, which is wisdom. So I guess that's tapping into my maturing, the maturity, the adult development, as we call it in the science. Humility. I also realised that, particularly with the speed of information and the evolution of the science, I couldn't possibly stay across all of the science. And I used to pride myself, and I guess it's where I got a lot of my sense of competence from, was knowing the science. And in the early days, when I taught positive psych, I could recall, I was able to quote all of the studies. And then it's like, there's no way. Like at a point in time, it was just like, I had to let go of this, and I had to develop a bit of intellectual humility. But I think, life also has given me experiences. I'm sure it's given it to you. Just sometimes you're on a roll and you think, I've got it, and then life will come along and you think, hang on a second, have I really got it? So I think I've really tried hard to maintain that level of humility. So that's wisdom, humility, energy. So for me, I guess it transformed. I had health originally and energy now. It's health for the purpose of feeling energetic, so I can keep up with my I've got 2 grandchildren, 2 boys, and another one due any time now. So I've got to keep my energy up. And then I have authenticity again, which again is about trying to stay true to what matters most to me. And then I put love in there. Oh, hang on. WH wasn't authenticity. It was abundance in there. So I sort of broadened financial abundance to just having that broader, abundant mindset of that, there's enough work for everybody, particularly, when I started, there was only a few of us in this space, and now there's so many positive psychologists and well-being consultants. And I guess, of course, I've got the, first mover advantage in many ways, and I just, realise that there is so much work to be done in this world. And so I actually welcome that and want to keep that abundant mindset.
Okay. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, you were sharing how success to you is living an authentic life. And living an authentic life is staying true to your core values. And now you've shared your core values. You were sharing humility in the intellectual sense. Was there also the humility in the sense of what your role? Modesty, but even just with regards to your different roles and your responsibilities. Humility in the sense of, I can handle this business stuff and be a great mum and everything else.
I guess, the humility and acknowledging that I'm not always doing a great job at managing all of that. It is a challenge to balance all of that. And I think also, I'm in a long-term relationship of 13 years now. I went through a divorce earlier on in my life, but and I think relationships, well, they've certainly taught me, I think maybe that's one of the outcomes or the success, what leads to successful relationships is having a level of humility, or also because I guess you mentioned I left school at 16. So I was the first person in my family to go to university. I never really thought I was smart, even though I actually went to a selective high school. But then, you're surrounded by people that are really smart, which sort of reinforced my belief that I wasn't smart. Left school at 16. And so a lot of my, I guess, confidence, self-esteem, if you like, has come from feeling competent through my knowledge. And so if you translate that into a relationship, and I'm sure my partner will have a listen to this too, I do like to be correct and right, but being in a relationship really allows me to challenge myself and to develop a bit of humility about perhaps you're not always right, Susie, but, I always try to quote the science, but things aren't always black and white. And that's part of my, I guess, growth and my own maturity, is realizing the different perspectives and ways of looking at things and holding things more lightly than what I probably would have when I was at that earlier stage of learning that, well, the science says this and the science doesn't say that. I was very attached to that, whereas now I hold some of that a lot more lightly.
Okay. Now, you were sharing that some of your values are in conflict.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like there's too much conflict between applying your wisdom, having humility,
Yeah.
both intellectually but also just in life,
Yeah.
making sure you have a lot of energy, having abundance of finance and knowledge and energy and all the other things,
Yeah.
and then also love. It doesn't sound like those would be in too much conflict. Can you talk
Well,
about
look,
that?
most of the time things have worked fairly smoothly. I guess for me, I have worked really, really hard. Like, as most people that run their own businesses will know, it's 7 days a week. And particularly when you're really passionate and you have a sense that this is what you're meant to be doing, um, the best thing, and I guess it is one of my, in a sense, pivotal moments, was meeting my partner, who really encouraged me to not be focused on work all the time, and to put the phone down, not be on the laptop all the time. And so my goals conflicts are around, I guess, having a sense of meaning and purpose in what I do and feeling like it's my calling, but simultaneously valuing my family and wanting to spend time with them. So I've actually got a bit of a transition plan happening now, Harry, though. So having run the business for about 13 years, I'll run the business probably for at least another 5 years, but I've been working with some consultants and with some associates to look at how I might transition. Like, I have no plans to retire, but possibly not run a business per se into the later stages of my life. I'll still do senior exec coaching, which I maintain a handful of quite senior executive coaching clients now. So I'll probably retain that, but I don't really want to be involved in the operations of running a small business as I progress into my, later stage of my career.
Okay. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners will still be really curious, but that's exciting. I'm
Yeah.
going to be excited to see where you go.
Oh,
But
thanks.
a lot of people might still be thinking, okay, great. Well, I've identified my core values. I came from the list of 5,000 or 500 or whatever list you found, and got it down to the 5 things that are most important.
Yes.
And let's just say that they've adopted your definition of success, which is living an authentic life, i.e., a life that's in line or consistent or congruent with your values.
Yeah.
And so they've got their values, and they find that there are certain things in their life which is just, you just can't do it that well. You can't, like, let's just say success was one of their values, right? Like, achievement was one of their 5 values. And let's just say that love was also one of their 5 values.
Yeah.
And when they're with their kids, well, achievement, maybe we need to pull that down a little bit and just kind of ramp up the love. Or maybe sometimes it needs to go the other way, just if you want to be more encouraging. How have you helped other people, and how have you seen other people do it successfully, manage to balance your conflicting values?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think one of the considerations is, for me, and I think it's aligned with the work I do as a coach, is we always talk about the fuzzy vision, the longer term, and it's meant to be fuzzy because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and there are things emerging all the time. So that's why the values become increasingly important, because if you have your values, even if they're not being lived as perhaps you thought what it was going to look like in your 30s, if they're being lived in some form, you're still going to get the well-being boost and I guess the sense of authenticity from living in alignment with your values. But I take, for example, health. And I did have health, as I mentioned, in my 30s. Now, my kids were only little and I was divorced, so we had shared care. It was very hard for me to maintain a physical exercise regime when the kids were little.
Yeah.
So particularly when they're really little and you can't leave them. Like, as they got older, I could, go for a run around the block for, 15 minutes, and they were okay by themselves for 15 minutes or, and then it gets, easier and easier as they got older. But for me, it was an acceptance at that time. So I was studying, I was finishing my doctorate. I had young children. I was trying to think about a career, what I was going to do. I was still dating, coming out of a divorce at the time. And I guess it was really challenging to sort of to balance all of those things. But I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I guess I chose to lean into that, what we might call radical acceptance of the fact that I did value all of those things. And if I wanted to have them, perhaps not to the level of what I'd ideally like. So for health, like now, I exercise nearly every day. Like I love it and I've got capacity and space to do that. But at that stage of my life, I accepted that if I could get 3 times a week, 30 minutes, like woohoo. It's not exercise as I ideally like it, a 10 out of 10, but maybe it was a 6 out of 10, but I was still living that value in some form or another. I guess then with my study and my career, and at that stage I was competing against a lot of, I guess, men in that day and age who had partners or wives at home cooking and cleaning and doing everything. And so I used to beat myself up that I wasn't publishing, as many articles, or my business wasn't going as fast as other people's, because I did have shared care, so I wasn't a completely sole parent, but I had to accept too that, my timeline, which I have been a late bloomer, Harry, like it's been a long journey, to get to where I am. And perhaps I could have gone further if I'd compromised on time with my children. And one thing I did learn, and I hope people listening do listen to this, is I learnt pretty quickly with my kids that when they were with me, so when they went to their dads, I would be like head down, focused, working. I'd have occasion. I would still manage to socialise a little bit because I had good friends and whatever. But when they were with me, I realised I had to be with them, because if I tried to study and attend to the kids, I would get frustrated and I would get, it would come out on the kids. And so that was a conscious decision I made at that time, that in many ways, I guess it was an opportunity, because the kids did go to their dad, 4 days, 3 days a week, 1 week, 4 days the next. And so, so I was able to really focus in on them when they were with me and not my study as much.
And so what I'm hearing you share is that when you're saying compromise, a lot of people hear that as kind of lower your expectations, right? It's not necessarily lower your standards. I get the sense from you when you're doing something, you're all in on it, right?
Yes, like absolutely.
Nothing holding you back. So you're not lowering your standards. You're lowering your expectations about what you're able to achieve given
in a certain time frame, I guess, in a certain time frame as well. So the business might have grown a lot quicker. My career might have developed a lot faster, but I'm also and time has given me this opportunity. I now say to people, I just believe timing's everything. Now, there's no science to that, but in my experience, the journey is more important. And I know that's a bit of a cliche than the destination, because it's that journey that I've been on that's helped me be who I am today, and I think that helps too, because it's not a smooth journey for many people. It is a developmental journey, whether you're in your own business or in your own life. And to hear, I guess, stories of success of people, well, most people will tell you it's not an overnight success. It is a journey. So I'm not regretful of any of those, I guess, choices I made, or because I'm exactly where I feel like I'm meant to be right now.
And so in those times where it's been a lot more challenging, how did you remain positive?
Yeah, I'm blessed with a pretty robust psyche, or mood, if you like. So my mum had anxiety. My dad had depression, not full, not all the time, but they both did have family histories. But I was blessed with a pretty robust mood. So my mum always said, you're always a happy kid. Like I was always, and I grew up as an only child. I have a half sister who's 21 years older than me, but I pretty much grew up as an only child that was cherished because my parents tried for years to have a child. They couldn't have one. And I came out of the blue in their late 30s. They didn't have a lot of wealth, but they pretty much gave me everything that they could, and encouraged me, to do my best, primarily. So, where was I going with that story? Just remind me.
You were saying mum had anxiety, dad depression, but you were reasonably well balanced. Yeah,
that's right. So how did I manage it? So I guess, that is a bit of a blessing. And I've realised that more and more over time, that I guess it is a bit, trait-like or personality-like, that I have got a pretty good mood and a pretty good mindset. Mind you, in my 20s, when I met my husband-to-be, in my 20s, and we married, he was doing psychiatry, so he was doing medicine, and which is one of the reasons why I went into psychology, because I became completely intrigued with his stories of what he was experiencing in psychiatry. And so I, through that relationship, put me on the path to psychology. So then he helped me become aware of some of my thinking. I guess my schemas are the words we use in psychology, or beliefs, or ants, we call them, automatic negative thoughts. And so I really learned, and then I learned it even more, I guess, rigorously when I did my clinical doctorate, was techniques like cognitive behavioural therapy. So in my 20s, learning those skills literally changed my life, Harry. So when I realised that I did not have to be a slave to my thoughts, that they were thoughts, not necessarily facts, and with the help of my partner at the time, I started to get a different perspective on life and on myself and how to manage myself. And then that took me into psychology, where I learnt more and more techniques on how to manage difficulties.
Most people imagine that a relationship ends because it's not positive enough, it's not serving their lives anymore, it's not going in the right direction. And there's the competing view that people feel that if they work hard enough at a relationship, and if they put in the effort, if they value it enough, that it will thrive and it will continue to survive. And then those are the types of relationships we look to, right? The people who are in their 80s and they've been married for 60 years or more. Whatever you're willing to share, what happened there, or what are some of the principles you learned throughout that experience that could have saved your marriage or could help people gain clarity of whether or not their marriage should continue?
Yeah, that's a really big question. And of course, my ex is the father of my children.
Of course.
And we have we actually did a very good job of co-parenting when the kids were little. And you'd hope that, wouldn't you, with a psychiatrist and a psychologist, but not always the case, Harry. But yeah, I think it was a lot to do with maturity. And I guess also socialization as a young girl growing up. I grew up in the Illawarra, and where I grew up, girls my age primarily did nursing, teaching, or secretarial school. And that's what I did. I ended up doing secretarial school, and it was a very good secretary, let me tell you, up until I went into psychology. But I had these, I guess, visions. My dream was to marry and have a happy marriage and have children. That's all I dreamed of, really, until I was in the marriage with my husband. And then, as I said, he was studying psychiatry, and I started to become intrigued with that. And I'd had a passion in my teens. I actually rode horses and competed at pony club and shows. So I had a passion in my teens. But then when I met my partner, he sort of became my passion, and I really wanted that dream that a lot of young girls, even today, probably still have, is to get married. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But my partner also had his own dreams. He was very interested in development, spirituality. He was on his own growth journey. And I guess our aspirations in our 20s, we were only very young, didn't match. And then I had a major growth spurt when I went to university. Like, my whole world opened up. I met people with different perspectives. And then as my perspectives grew and my I guess, maturity grew, we were at odds with each other, really, for a period. And so, yeah, it wasn't an easy decision because it really wasn't what I wanted or what he wanted, I would say now in hindsight. But I now look at it as part of my developmental journey. And I'm really, really grateful for that because I learnt so much from him through that period. And I have two beautiful children, thanks to that also.
Is that a big part of wellness, positivity, resilience, by being able to view things that at one time would have seemed really hard and
Yeah.
that you didn't want as something which has really helped you and supported your life?
I think so. One of my first mentors when I was training to be a psychologist, she's passed on now, but she invited me in to sit with her for 2 weeks to just observe how she worked with clients. And it was down in the Illawarra. And so you got the full gamut of psychological disorders or life stressors that were happening to people. So it was an incredible experience. But I remember her saying to people, like, it's absolutely awful now what you're going through. But she said, in time, and she said, there's something, again, not scientific, but call it spooky, whatever you like, about this. But you will meet people, you will encounter people that are going through those experiences, and you'll have great empathy for them, and you potentially can help them. So she was saying that to the clients. But I think as a psychologist, like I did do relationship counseling for a little while, but it wasn't for me. It was not for me. But I think, you do, when having those life experiences as a psychologist, as a therapist, as a coach, it really does help you have greater empathy for the people that you work with, I believe. And it does help your own mental health when you can have a meaningful and hopeful narrative, even though it was painful. Out of that pain has come a lot of good things in my life.
Beautiful. Yeah, my 4-year-old daughter the other day came up to me. She was very upset about something, and she went away. She did some meditation. She calmed herself down.
Oh, wow.
She came back. I said, "You were really upset just then, and you don't look upset anymore. What happened?" It's like, "Well, Daddy, I remembered something." I said, "What do you remember?" She says, "I remember when we were talking about how I've been sad lots of times. I've been sore lots of times. I've been angry lots of times, but I'm not still sad. I'm not still angry. I'm not still sore. That all goes away. So maybe this will go away too."
What
She
a
doesn't
wise
always,
little soul.
she doesn't always remember that though, but in that particular moment, it felt pretty good.
And are you teaching her that, or are they learning it at school? Which is
No,
what's
I
happening?
taught that.
Good on you.
Just recently, actually, I was excited by it. I feel this should go on some sort of resume. I went into a school, and a group of 15 3 to 5-year-olds were sitting down with me, and I was teaching them meditation, and I managed to get this group of kids to take 10 deep breaths with their eyes closed at the same time.
Amazing. That's a challenge, isn't it?
That felt pretty cool.
That's the challenge. Oh, that's so wonderful that you can do that. And part of my work has been in education and teaching kids. I mean, we never learnt those skills at school, or you were very lucky if you had a parent. Most of us didn't, because they didn't have the skills themselves. So that's wonderful to hear.
When you were sharing that, I was reminded of another guest which I had on recently. His name's Scott Doty. He's done exceptionally well with what he does, but he realized a big part of success for him was being able to bring his unique gift to the world, but then also help other people bring out theirs.
Yes.
And he was quite smart when he was young, and he was 2 years younger than most of the other kids after he skipped some years.
Wow.
And all he wanted was a friend, really, and he had no friends back then, and he felt lonely. And what he found that did for him was it helped him bring his unique gift to the world, because now he has deep empathy for anyone who's feeling lonely.
I know. I hear that story. And they'll often they'll notice that, and they'll try and be inclusive with that person. And I think that's wonderful, even though it wasn't that pleasant for him at the time.
No, it wasn't. Okay, so maybe to talk specifically about positivity. I've read some of your stuff, some of your work and some of your blogs, and I've heard you mention wellness and resilience and positivity. And for a lot of people, those three terms are all interchangeable. Would you be happy to expand on some of that and maybe some experience of from your life journey as well on the differences between those different facets of your psychology?
Yep. So it was wellness or well-being, positivity, and what was the other one?
Resilience.
And resilience. Yeah, I can do that primarily based on the science, but I can also make reference because I do try to walk the talk as much as I can in living this stuff over the
Yeah.
last however many years. So I guess in the field of positive psychology, it's formally defined as the science of optimal human functioning, but a large part of the research since it launched in late 1998, but even prior to that, there was some pre-existing work on what's known as subjective well-being, which was how happiness was measured originally, and by the incredible late Professor Ed Diener that did most of the work there. And that is measured by an assessment, a brief assessment of how satisfied am I with my life now. I think there's about 6 questions. Questions like, just like, how satisfied am I with my life? But also, if I had to live my life over, would I change anything? Questions like that. So life satisfaction plus what's called the PANAS, which is a measure of positive affect and negative affect, which means how many positive emotion versus how many negative am I feeling on a regular basis. And so someone that's experiencing high levels of subjective well-being is relatively satisfied with their life, and they are experiencing more, on average, more positive emotions, like joy, like gratitude is an emotion. It's also a cognition, but gratitude, elevation is a positive moral emotion. There's about 10 different positive emotions that have been identified in the research. And then that's often known as hedonic well-being. So it seems to, it has more of a focus, I guess, on pleasure. That's how the debate's gone. And then there's been another version called eudaimonic, which comes from Aristotle and is a broader conceptualization of well-being. So it includes things like positive relations with others, purpose in life, a sense of autonomy. There's about 6 different facets to that. So, and look, they're great. I'm always of the mindset that use those tools as conversation starters. So I might get my clients to use that assessment, and then that opens a conversation for us around where are the areas of strength that is having a positive impact on their well-being, and where are the areas that they might want to work on development as well. So look, that's an ongoing debate. Well-being is a very complex construct even today in the field of positive psychology. So there's still a bit of debate around it. Resilience, again, based on various approaches, is typically identified as underpinning well-being. So we have this level of resilience that it supports our well-being. They're similar but slightly different, I guess. So when we're looking at well-being literature, we're often looking at how do we proactively enhance well-being, whereas resilience is, and that could be just like when things are going well. But resilience is typically when there's adversity and when things aren't going so well. And even though there might be some similar psychological tools, such as mindset tools, for example, we might use them slightly different in a clinical realm for resilience versus in a coaching realm for, well-being and performance. And that's where I've been able to, I guess, utilize my clinical training and a lot of the approaches I learned, like cognitive behavioral therapy, ACT, other type of psychotherapies, they can, in many instances, be transferred in to be used in a proactive approach. And that's why I've been so passionate, Harry, is I realized very early on in my career, why do we wait until people are unwell to teach them these skills? Sitting in the psychiatrists or the clinical psychs, we need to get them into schools early on, which is, finally happening. Not all schools yet, but it's happening.
You just reminded me of a conversation I had on the podcast probably a year or 2 ago. It was with Matt Elliott from The Change Room.
Okay.
And he spoke about this idea of capacity versus resilience.
Okay.
And spoke about it in the context of sports psychology, but then relating it to actual psychology.
Yes.
Sports physiology. And he was talking about capacity as how heavy the thing is that you can lift or how far you can run, right?
Yeah.
The performance attribute, what you're referring to.
Yeah.
The resilience is actually how quickly your body can recover after lifting the heavy things. So if you lift something really heavy, you've torn
Yeah.
some muscles, how
Yeah.
quickly do your muscles repair so you can lift a heavy thing again? And that's
Yes.
resilience, bringing yourself back up to your capacity.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And I think that's why I've been so passionate on talking and inspiring people to invest in building those capacities so that you can be more resilient and, bounce back, if you like, or bounce forward, which is, post traumatic growth that's referenced now. Um, I guess from my perspective, when we're training on resilience, we use a construct called mental toughness.
Okay.
And it did come out of sports psychology by Professor Peter Clough in the UK. It's not exactly the same, but it's a really user-friendly framework to help people understand a big, hairy, multi-dimensional construct like resilience. So mental toughness is made up, it's called the 4C model, which is confidence, commitment, control, and challenge. And so they know that people that are higher on mental toughness, and it sits on a bell curve, as most psychological attributes do, those that are mentally tough have higher levels of challenge, control, confidence, and commitment. Now, where it can be used, like, for example, building up your confidence in your abilities or your interpersonal confidence can be used for resilient in adversity for resilience. So can commitment, persevering, sticking at it, not giving up. So can control, which is made up of emotional control and environmental control. But challenge, this is where it varies a little bit from resilience, because with resilience, as you've rightly said, usually something is happening to us, like something occurs, some adversity happens. And then it's how we use those capacities and ideally respond rather than react. But with mental toughness and this fourth C of challenge, people high in mental toughness don't wait for things to happen for their growth and development, because we all know when you go through things, they're awful, but generally people will find, a silver lining and say, I've grown so much through that awful event. Often it's in hindsight many years later. But with mental toughness, people that are high on challenge, high mental toughness, they will think about, how do I stretch myself? How do I take on challenges with the explicit idea, I guess, or goal of developing myself and building up my capacity. So by consciously and proactively pushing myself out of my comfort zone, whether that's physically or mentally or socially or whatever it is, that process proactively builds up these capacities so that when next time the adversity hits, the capacities are stronger to cope with that.
Okay. I like this because this isn't how the average person will think about positivity, right? Most
No.
people think about positivity. It's like, oh, I'm happy and everything's all good, right? Like how you're defining the subjective well-being. I'm satisfied with my life and
Yeah.
I'm feeling more good than bad and it's all good, which I think the term hedonism is a perfect term for it either way. And here you're talking about the extent of how positive your psychology is also about how excited you are for the challenges and how excited you are to learn from the
Yeah.
challenges that present themselves.
Yes, because I know in particular because of my clinical work that bad things happen, and some people get more than their fair share, Harry, which is awful. But why do we wait? And I guess I'm not saying, will it prevent every episode of depression or anxiety? Well, possibly not, right? But why wouldn't you teach kids these skills at school to have them, and also pair it with something like adventure education, which is with some of the work we've done with schools is we've trained the students and the teachers on the mental toughness model. They've gone out on their adventure education, camping and hiking and whatever, and then the adventure, the outdoor ed people that work with them and the teachers within the school, they're sort of coaching in real time about using those capacities in a stretch situation out in an adventure education, which I think is a fantastic way because it's not really, you can teach these skills in a classroom, but it's not until you're given some stretch opportunity that they become meaningful or you really get to use them.
How do things such as affirmations in the moment or things that you can remind yourself of or specific things you can do in that moment when you feel like you're being stretched, how much does that help? And what are some of those tools that we can use?
I think it helps a lot. But firstly, it has been I don't think it was replicated, but there was one study which I continue to quote, and it resonates with me, around affirmations, which was, if your affirmations are too far of a stretch from where you're at, it can actually undermine your level of competence. They don't work.
Hmm.
So they need to be just a little bit of a stretch, and then you keep stretching them and to what aligns with your capabilities, if you like. Because it's like your brain goes, oh, well, I know that I'm so far away from that affirmation right now. So if you just stretch them a little bit. But in terms of, I guess, hopefulness, and there's a whole theory and body of research around hope in psychology and positive psychology. And we know when you're perhaps in the real time situation or you're going through adversity, we know people that are more hopeful. So they tell themselves hopeful narratives. So they build up their sense of agency, their self-efficacy, their belief that they can do it. And you've got a little 4-year-old, I don't know if they still have that wonderful, it used to be a golden book, the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can, I know I can, I know I can. So being able to talk sense to yourself, and a lot of this also draws on cognitive behavioral approaches.
Sure.
Like, what are the stories that I'm telling myself? Are they undermining my beliefs or undermining my capacity or my progression, or are they supporting my progression by telling myself, I've overcome adversity in the past, I've got resources, there are people in my network? So what are these hopeful narratives? And if you're going through an adversity that's over a period of time, and I went through an awful business partnership breakup many years ago, and I know I wrote them out like affirmations on cards. I had them on my mirror because I really needed them to sink into my head to believe that I could get through that at that time. And it worked really well for me.
Okay. I'm curious to hear more about that breakdown as well. But
Yeah.
just when you're talking about hope, most people think about hope as like this
Yeah.
fluffy thing,
Fluffy,
but
feather
it's
thing.
almost as if you're describing confidence and commitment.
Well, hope is broader than just confidence, because hope theory is made up of 3 components. One is goals. So the high hopers compared to the low hopers. The high hopers usually have more than one goal. So, they've got a few important things, personally meaningful goals aligned to their values. They have a high sense of agency, which is possibly more related to what we call self-efficacy in psychology. So a belief in my capacity to reach those goals. They believe that they can, and they have what we call multiple pathways when they're thinking about their goals. And I'm a high hoper. I, at the outset, will go, right, I could do this, and if that doesn't work, I'll try this, 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 and this. So whereas a low hoper very rarely even set goals. They might even come from families where their parents haven't, I guess, had that hope or that confidence to pursue goals. So they don't often set goals. If they do, it's one goal. They often don't have a high degree in their ability to get there, and they'll often just set one pathway. And if it gets blocked by some external reason, they usually give up. And I'll give you just a quick example. When I was seeing individual clients, I only have, as I said, a handful of senior clients now, but I did quite a bit of coaching with senior high school students at the time, which I loved. But usually it would be a call from the parent, that would say, oh, my son or my daughter, I don't know how they're going to go through year 12, or they want to be, they want to be a rock star, and I don't know if that's realistic. And anyway, one young man came in and his parents were very concerned. He had one course and one course only that he wanted to get into university. They weren't confident he was going to get into it. His mood was not great already, and their concerns were, what is going to happen to him if he doesn't get into that course? And they had reason to believe that he would not be in a very good state. So anyway, they brought him in, and thankfully, again, I'm a clinician as well as a coach. And so through that process or that program, I helped increase his hope. And in fact, one of my randomized controlled trials I've done on coaching has shown that coaching increases hope from pre to post coaching. And I know you often work in this sort of field as well. So what we did was we looked at what mattered to him, his values, the things that at that point in his life mattered to him. And then, what was he ultimately trying to do into his fuzzy vision? And at that point, he hadn't really given that much thought. He was just thinking about getting into this course. So we had time to unpack that, explore what would he do when he finished that course? What was he hoping to do? So we're looking at the longer term vision. And then through, I guess, the questioning, Socratic questioning, helped him to determine how much control have you got over this outcome? Are you completely in control getting into that course? Even if you get the marks, what if there are many people applying for that course and they change the cutoff or the numbers? So I helped him to understand he didn't have 100% control through questioning techniques. And he basically went and did his research, came back. It wasn't me telling him this, it was me questioning. And then we said, okay, given that you can do, of course, I'm going to support you to do your best and enhance your chances of achieving it. But what other pathways that would still get you to where you want to go into the future, but might not be the path that you thought? Because in this day and age, it's not linear, our lives, our careers. There's many opportunities. There's many sideway moves we can move. And so sent him away to do some homework, and he came back with, 3 other courses that he could possibly do that would get him to where it might be a sideway move. And I guess I can't actually recall whether he got into that course. Now, it's such a while ago now, Harry. But I know his parents were happy that he had backup plans, which is really what hope is about. It's having, if that goal gets blocked, and sometimes, as I said, you don't have control, there's other pathways that are still going to be values aligned, so they'll fit with what's important to you, and they still might get you there to your fuzzy vision, through that process.
So I hear this, and then I also think about this idea of like burning the boats, right? I think it was World War II. I think that one of the American generals noticed that his soldiers had really low morale, and they needed to take the island. And all they were thinking about was just going back home to their families.
Right.
And he decided, well, the only way we're going to do this is with a morale boost. He burnt all of their boats and said, if you want to get back home to your families, we've got to take this island and take their boats back. And then they took the island, right? And it's touted in.
They didn't have any other choices.
No other choices.
Yeah.
And how does this compare with that?
Well, I guess in that example, I don't know whether there were any other pathways because he took that away. I guess they could still have decided to just stand still and not fight. I guess that is still a choice. But, I think in that case there were limited pathways, whereas I'm saying in most scenarios, that's a pretty extreme one, there are pathways that people don't see or don't consider. And what we know from a clinical perspective, particularly with clinical depression, is our thinking shuts down, which is why with somebody with clinical depression, it can spiral down to only one way out, which, as we sadly know, might be taking of someone's life. Whereas with positive psychology, what we've been able to show is if you can consciously work on boosting your positivity, and when I say positivity, I mean positive emotional state, so trying to lift your mood up, get a bit of upliftment, but also I'm talking about positive, and I'm not going to say positive thinking because I don't just mean magical thinking, but hopeful thinking, like I was saying before, and optimistic thinking. So for me, positivity is boosting positive emotions. Doesn't mean getting rid of the so-called negative ones, but really consciously working on creating a bit of joy in our lives, which will broadens our visual perception. The research tells us it makes us more creative, more solution focused. So when you lift somebody's mood, if you're coaching someone, or even when I was working clinically, and you get them to talk about what's working well, even if it was just one day out of the last 7 that something good happened. You get them talking about their strengths, you can see their body change, you can see them lift up, and you can see their thinking start to open. Whereas again, if I was just working traditionally as I was trained in the early days, it's changing thankfully now, Harry, in clinical psych, but it was like, what are the symptoms? What's the diagnosis? Symptom reduction, so there wasn't much talk about the power of positive emotions and joy as a buffer against mental ill health, as well as a way to be creative and solution focused.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I know we're going to be running low on time soon.
Yes.
I was wondering if you still had some time that you're happy to share about this business breakdown and when the business didn't go so well.
I'm happy to share that as much as I can.
Thank you.
I I guess, I mentioned I went through a divorce in my early 30s, which wasn't pleasant. And I mean, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as some of the horrendous stories I do hear, because we did had to navigate a shared care arrangement. But I guess there was a grieving of that life that I had envisaged for myself, of being the married, with the kids. And so I had to grieve that, and that was sad, and it was hard with the kids through that navigation. But then I finished my doctorate, went out on my own as a sole trader, was getting a name in the field of coaching, was approached by a large school to do one of the first positive education program. Anyway, I had a business partner at the time, and it all worked pretty well for the first couple of years. But then things changed, and it's so interesting when you look back at things, because I've also seen what was happening for me at the time. As much as I guess I was disappointed that I realized that we weren't actually aligned around our values or the way that we worked. I guess I had this increasing recognition that we weren't aligned over those 2 years. But then I met my partner that I'm still with now, 13 years, and it really opened my eyes around what I wanted to do, where I wanted to spend my time. And that also was a little, what's the word, a chaotic attractor, I think is the term in system science. So it led to a decision that I made to leave the business partnership. At the time, my business partner, that's not what she wanted. And so she was understandably, I guess, disappointed, but the exit from that was not pretty. It's all I'm going to say. It was not pretty. And it took every single psychological skill that I had to navigate coming out of that. And it was like a 2-year experience, which was very, very difficult to navigate at the time. But again, now I look back and I think, wow, look how much stronger I am through that. And also, as a psychologist, I had had no training in business, legals, accounting. Like, I was just learning as I was going. I had engaged lawyers and accountants, but boy, did I get, I don't know what the saying, education by fire or whatever. I learnt so much going through that, which I'm really grateful for that experience now again. So, but I think sometimes it is the beauty of hindsight, isn't it? At the time, it's awful, horrendous, but it did put my skills to the test. And the one thing I did learn, though, Harry, was some of those skills I found it very difficult to apply by myself. So what I've realized, and I now teach in our workshops, is when you're in the eye of the storm, it is very hard. It's like people, the first thing to go is their exercise. Oh, I'm too stressed, I haven't got time for it. When in fact, that's the last thing that should go when you're stressed is your exercise. It's the same sort of analogy. But what I realized, you need people around you that are equipped with some of these skills, have a language to talk to you. And so that's why I'm so passionate about teaching this in organizations too, because there'll all be times when we're going through tough times. And there's a wonderful video that's played in leadership training called Lessons from Geese. It's been around a very long time. You can Google it on YouTube. And it talks about how geese fly in the V formation. They fly in the V. And then if one of the geese is not well and it drops back, a couple of the other geese will also drop back with it and make sure it's okay, and then bring it back into the V formation, or they'll fly off with it and take it to safety. And so I use that analogy for in the leadership training. It's more about we all need to work together as a team. But for me, this applies to when we're having particularly mental health or wellbeing challenges, how if we've got the people around us that are equipped, then we can help each other when we can't help ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, because most I'd imagine that during those 2 year, the 2 year period of time that you're going through this grief of the business breakdown, if someone came up to you and go, come on, just be happy about it, it's all good, you're going to feel great about it in a few years, trust me, in 10, 15, 20 years time, you're going to look back on this and be so grateful for it, it's all good.
No, and that's what I guess what's being referred to as toxic positivity now. And I guess I want to just differentiate that. What I'm talking about is not toxic positivity. So toxic positivity is exactly as you describe, where people sort of, be happy or it'll be okay, and they don't really allow you the space to grieve or to express how you're feeling or just to sit with you, which can be quite hard to do. And I think I'm seeing younger generation really learning some of the skills to do that now. And I think through a lot of programs like Are You Okay? And, just a greater awareness of mental health and how we manage mental ill health. But what I'm talking about is, as I said, how do we boost, and it's not black and white. So there can be times when, awful things are happening, whether I'm watching the news and there's something awful, but then, and I use this, I guess, example fairly recently when my dad was quite, he's at the end of his life. He was in an aged care home. He was not happy. And I'd ring him every second day. And, I'd try and bring a bit of joy to his day, Harry, because, yes, I would validate, no, I know the food's not great, Dad, like I'd validate his experience. But he then wanted to know what was happening for me. And he got some joy around hearing some of the work that I was doing. So I'd have to try and monitor my mood so that I could give him a little bit of joy in his day also. So I think, we have to hold this lightly. It's not black and white, it's not so black and white, our mood state or our experience of emotions.
I seem to see that most people tend to treat others the way that they treat themselves.
Yes.
And a lot of the time people don't treat themselves that well. They treat themselves as
No.
brush it off. It's okay. It's all good. Don't worry about it.
I know. And a lot of us have been, and particularly boys and young men, it's changing now because my daughter's a mother of 2 boys and she's learning all these skills of how to, like you did with your daughter, that wonderful example. We didn't have those skills. Like I really think I wish I'd learnt them when I was a younger mum, rather than as the kids were getting older. But, it was like pull your socks up, you're all right, get on with it. That was how a lot of us were brought up in those days, rather than having permission that it's okay, or helping as parents, as the messaging now is helping kids name the emotion so they've got a language and a literacy for it. So things are changing for the better, thankfully.
That's a nice positive note to end our conversation on.
Yes.
Is there anything else which you wanted to add based on our conversation? Normally I give a recap. I know we're short on time. Is there anything else which you wanted to add or share based on what we've gone through today?
I think when I did reflect on sort of pivotal moments, which we covered, which is around, I guess, having my family and that balance and managing the conflict with values, meaning and purpose, having that recognition that, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm meant to do, which I love. I love that. And I know not everyone has that or finds that easily. But I think a message I'd like to leave is just the power of education. So again, I left school at 16, but I did have a privilege of going to university, and and again now with the cost of University of Education, I know that's not always a path that's open to everyone, but there's now MOOCs, the massive open online courses. If you've got access, and again, I know globally not everybody has access to technology, but there's so much more opportunity to self-educate, and education is freedom from my perspective. It gives you so much more opportunity and freedom and options. So I would just encourage people. And when it comes to my field of positive psych, there are free MOOCs. I think there's at least 3 of those massive open online courses at Yale is a really brilliant one, another one in the US. So there's lots of free learning available, as well as whether you want to do a master's or not.
And is there any final notes of wisdom or anything you wish that the listeners would hear? Imagine that your daughters come back and listen to this in another 40, 50 years and they just want to hear something from mum. What do you wish they heard?
My mum brought me up. She was one of the kindest people ever. But I think what you said before is we don't always apply that to ourselves. So I've been had very high standards for myself. I've been quite harsh on myself over the years. And so learning a lot of the work that's been emerging out of the field around self-compassion, Kristen Neff's wonderful work, has been something that I've learnt probably later in life, So I just think, and I hope I convey this particularly to my daughter and my son, to be kind to yourself, Don't be so harsh on ourselves. I think in most cases we're all trying to do the best we can, and we don't always have control over those outcomes. So just really be self-compassionate as much as we can.
Perfect note to end it on.
Yay.
Thank you, Suzy.
Thank you so much for the work you do.
So that was a really beautiful conversation with Suzy. We had to cut it just so that she could get to her next meeting. I hope you received a lot of value from that conversation as well. The main summary points from the conversation is that when we're talking about defining success, she was referring to this idea of living an authentic life. What matters most to her? What are her core life values? How do you stay true to what matters most and live in congruence with that? In her 30s, she managed to get a list of hundreds or thousands of life values down to 5, which for her was spirituality, health, authenticity, love, and I think financial. And then as she's gotten older and more wise in her years, she's adjusted it to wisdom and humility and energy and abundance and love. And for her, it's about recognizing that she's not always going to be the top of the game. She's not always going to be perfect. She's not always going to achieve the standards that she sets for herself, but she wants to keep pursuing them. And so she has that growth mindset in that sense, right? Like it's not just about the fuzzy, long distant vision, which is meant to be fuzzy and who knows how you get there. It's about the values which need to remain consistent because they're more important. Then she was saying that when you have your values conflicting, such as when you're valuing your family and your connection and your relationships versus your focus on career and work and where you want to get to and what you're so focused on, then it just requires a level of acceptance. Your health is going to be influenced by how busy you are at work. Your work is going to be influenced by how much time your kids or your spouse need. And so when talking about some of the most pivotal moments in her life, there was meeting her first partner or her first husband, who really encouraged her towards learning clinical psychology and helping her with psychiatry skills, and gave her a completely different perspective on life of where she otherwise would have been. She had her divorce, which gave her maturity. Like you start out, then you develop in life maturity and passion, and you have your dreams which change, and what your role is in life that changes as well. And so the marriage broke down or separated or ended because their aspirations for their lives and their dreams didn't match anymore. And so she had the grief of divorce. She had grief of a business breakdown. And another pivotal moment for her, other than the business breakdown, which she spoke about quite a bit, was meeting her current partner, who encouraged her to put the phone down, not always do work in meetings, be more present with the kids. And she made this point of she just wishes that she had all the knowledge she has today when she was with her kids. And we didn't talk too much about this point, but it reminds me of a saying that you experience is the thing that you have after the first time you needed it the most. And so she shares some interesting messages. She shares the power of education. Go and educate yourself as much as you can. There's heaps of free stuff that you can learn online. There's all this stuff at Yale and a bunch of other places where you can just get free education, especially about positive psychology, but about pretty much anything. Remember that your well-being is pretty much subjective, right? Like how satisfied are you with your life? How much you're feeling positive versus how much you're feeling negative on a regular basis. And then when you expand it out, you're talking about positive relations with others and your autonomy and your purpose. And resilience is not the same thing as well-being. It's when things aren't going so well. And so you need to be proactive. You need to make sure that you've got your confidence, your commitment, your control, and your challenge. And how are you able to handle each of those things as well? And that most of the time, people will end up finding that they don't have enough hope in order to really achieve. And when they have more hope, and the term for this hope is not a fluffy one, it's, do you have multiple goals? Do you have a belief in your own agency? Do you have multiple pathways on how you can achieve the outcomes that you're striving for? That when you have that, then you're going to be more joyful and more positive, and then you're actually going to be more likely to achieve the outcome as well. And so then you start to focus on your strengths and the opportunities rather than focusing on your weaknesses and how few opportunities you have. And so she finally shared that her main life message to anyone who's listening and wants to learn from her as a mentor is just to have more self-compassion. That doesn't mean that you give up on yourself. It doesn't mean that you should just be kind and fluffy and who cares about the outcomes. It's like, no, self-compassion and being kind to yourself are what Suzy argues, are the ways that you can indeed be more likely to achieve your outcomes, be more likely to achieve success in achieving a life living your values and being able to experience a life authentically towards your values. Hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Thanks for listening. So I hope you received a whole lot of value from engaging in that conversation. What were the key takeaways for you? What can you schedule in your life right now to make sure that the time you just invested into listening to this exceptional conversation with this amazing mentor and this amazing individual is time that wasn't misused, but was time that you've allocated properly to enhancing your life and improving it? Whatever it is, schedule it now, practice it now. Be the successful person you're meant to be. Live with purpose.